Hey guys, how's it going today? How you doing? So in today's episode of Characters That Bring Your Writing to Life, I wanted to talk about the two most favorite characters, most popular characters that I've written about so far, and that is Theros Hammerfist and Dominar Digwell. So these characters are two characters that are a whole lot of fun for me, not only to write about, but to talk about, and that is primarily because of the feedback that I get from people like you, the readers, the fans. So, but I want to talk about a little bit about those guys and go into a little bit of who those characters are, for those who don't know, but into why those characters are so effective characters and why they drive my writing forward, and they've helped me find a lot of success in the writing that I've done so far, and why a lot of readers are looking for more. They're anticipating more. They're waiting for new books because they want to see where this story goes. And again, it's all because of the characters. So without further ado, I'm going to get into it. Dominar Digwell and Theros Hammerfist, I affectionately call the odd couple, if you will. So what we have in this pairing, we have Dominar, who is a dwarf, and we have Theros, who, interestingly enough, is an orc. And these are two very different characters in a lot of ways. And I think that's part of the reason why they end up being paired together. These guys are really good friends. It takes a while until into the book before they come together. But once they do come together, you realize that these guys, they have a very deep friendship, very meaningful friendship that dates a ways back. And we'll get to see that contrast as the storylines in DragonsFire kind of come together and weave together. You'll get to see how these two interact. And especially as the series moves forward into books 2 and 3 and such, you'll get to see that interaction a lot more, which is really exciting. But so what we have, I'll give you a little bit. We have two characters that are very different. They have a lot of character traits. Physically, they're very different. Stature, they're very different. The way that they go about things and solving problems is very different. The one thing that they have is that common bond with each other, their friendship, which is more valuable than just about anything else in their lives. So that's the one thing there. But how are they different? Why are they different? Well, I'm going to get into reading two little excerpts here that will kind of give you a picture, if you aren't familiar with them, with these characters, and then we'll dissect that just a little bit and try to have a little bit of fun with this. So first, I'll go in with an excerpt out of DragonsFire, and this is out of chapter 14, and that chapter is No Crown, No Kingdom. Dominar. He was the only true dwarven master smith left on Darnesi, and he was in high demand. There was so much to do these days. The work seemed endless. More and more families brought their heirlooms and crests to his smithy. They would want new versions of the family legacies crafted. Pounding their ancestors' legacy into hardened iron was a daily task. Ornately worked shields, helms, and weapons were a work of love for him. Yet these days they were merely mantelpieces. The sounds of battle were so faint to his aging memory. He worked his talents into the molten metal each day, but he felt the love to be unrequited. Shields no longer saved lives, but rather decorated the doors of family homes. Mighty axes and hammers were not used to vanquish foes, but simply hung over fireplaces as reminders of family lore. He felt like a butcher amongst vegans, highly skilled with a passion and purpose, but seemingly misplaced. Often as he pounded down upon the anvil, his thoughts drifted away to a deeper recess. So in that excerpt there in chapter 14, we get a short little glimpse of Dominar, this dwarf. And unlike most dwarfs, he's painted with a little different stroke there. He's, traditional dwarves, the kind that you'll find in Tolkien's works, which were a heavy inspiration for me. They typically have a certain feel to them, a certain mold that those dwarves come from, and they were a huge inspiration for me. But Dominar doesn't really fit that mold. Visually, yeah, he'd probably fit the mold, but he's more of a more wise, compassionate, gentle, soft-spoken, and more of a religious or a faith type of character who holds strong to his beliefs and the beliefs that he's been taught through generations down through his ancestry. So he's very different. He's not the loud, brash, ale-drinking, rowdy, raucous-causing dwarf, and those characters are super fun. That's just not who Dominar is. Now, he also stands out from the crowd amongst his own people because that's not who he is, and there are definitely those within his dwarven brethren who might fit that mold better, but he's very different there. He's just this very thoughtful and considerate leader type, a very grandfatherly type of character, but at the same time he's a guy who has seen battle, he's seen bloodshed, he's fought in wars, and he makes shields and hammers and swords and axes and implements of war. So he's not this guy who's timid or hasn't seen these things. He's a person who's seen the ugly side of war and all that, but he's just a very different character. His person is this one particular gentle grandfatherly type of image who's often imparting wisdom and trying to help people make wise choices. He's very different than Theros in certain ways, but they're a good complement to each other. So with Theros, I'm going to read a little excerpt here, and this excerpt is from Chapter 7, the Tribal Council. Now, Theros, we'll get to see here, is different from not only Dominar, but he's different from most orcs as well. So, or at least the traditional orcs that you're familiar with from, say, Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit or whatever. So let's read a little bit about him. It was nearly breakfast time, so their patrol would have been reaching its conclusion. It was such a gorgeous morning, though, who could blame them for taking their time? Even the wind slept in this morning, and it was quiet and peaceful. 2 hawks swirled high above in a cloudless sky. Autumn meant the air was getting cooler, but the warmth of the sun was a nice touch. Then drums shattered it all. Boom, 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 boom. The behemoth stilled his movements, his breathing. He listened. Boom, 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 boom. Returning to his business, Theros reached down and cupped water from the stream in his big gray hands. He dipped his face into his hands and let the water wash down over his face and past the single fang that jutted upward from the left corner of his mouth to splash to the grassy bank below. The warrior wiped his face with a rugged forearm. He opened his eyelids to reveal startling bright blue eyes that contrasted sharply with his slate complexion. The orc took a deep breath and exhaled before wringing the water from the foot-long white braid that hung from his chin. His broad chest rose as he inhaled deeply, then he rose from the kneeling position. "Time to go, Swift," he spoke to the wolf lying on the ground near him. Lounging in the sunlit grass, the animal sprang to his paws at his friend's command. Turning toward the sound of the drums, Theros and the gray wolf ran east. So that little excerpt there might give you a little bit of a visual on Theros and his furry friend Swift. So Theros, first off, he's different from a lot of the traditional orcs that you might have seen in movies or read about in books. Unlike the Tolkien version of orcs that you've read about or seen in the Fellowship of the Ring series or the Lord of the Rings series, he is not this mindless savage that's born out of goo in the ground. No, the orcs are a people group in the world of Orion in my writing, and they have their own culture, they have their own belief systems, they have their own way of life. Physically looking, once you get into the descriptions, they're very much akin to the look and appearance of, say, the orcs from like a World of Warcraft type of setting. That was a big inspiration for me. When I played World of Warcraft years ago, I definitely was a big a big fan of the way that the orcs looked and felt in game, the play, the style, the aesthetics of that. So a big similarity there in their physical stature and stuff. Very different in their way of life, but in their stature, very similar there. Now, Theros, unlike most of the orcs, actually has a gray complexion, as we read there. But physically, he's definitely this very large, imposing warrior figure, even big amongst his own kind. Him and his brother are about the largest within their people, but he's this big physical warrior. Who is he as a person? He's generally soft-spoken for the most part, but at the same time, he's not the most patient, and for him, solutions are often found at the end of his hammers, which just coincidentally happen to be made of dwarven iron. He's not a religious person. He's not a person of faith, if you will. His beliefs are really about taking care of family, loyalty, and if you don't like the answer you're getting, sometimes a threat of violent force is the solution. So very different than the more gentle, soft-spoken, easy-handed approach of Dominar. But I think they go well together because the one common bond is just that their friendship and loyalty. And you'll see, if you read through DragonsFire, you'll see where that comes from. But the great thing is so we have these two interesting characters that as the story goes on, people really relate to them. And usually they're typically, if somebody tells me that Theros was their favorite character, it's usually Theros and Dominar, or vice versa. And usually people relate to one maybe a little bit more than the other, but they usually are, people tell me that they love them both, 1A, 1B type of situation. Now, what happens in the writing? So let's focus on the writing for a minute. So the cool thing that happens when you have these two characters, this odd couple that you can pair together, what you get is this contrasting situation where you can play the character traits against each other, not just physically. So Dominar is this older, aging dwarf. Physically, his skills are diminished. He longs for battle, but the reality is if he gets back into battle, he's not going to be the same he was 20 years before. He's older and slower, and his skills are diminished because he hasn't been on the battlefield in a long time, versus Theros, who is really, he's old as well, compared to human standards, but in an orc's life, he's still in his prime. He's this, this warrior of great physical prowess and stature, and so there's a huge contrast in any battle scenes, but in terms of the way that they approach situations, they're both very cerebral characters, but Dominar is definitely more patient, more gentle, more easier to take a more meandering approach to arrive at a certain destination or conclusion, and Theros is more the shortest path. Who cares about the amount of resistance? So just kind of charge forward and ahead. And so in the writing, what I can do is as situations arise, I can allow these differences to really kind of play off each other and make the situation very dynamic. And what that does is it really allows you as the writer to accentuate these characters even more, because when you have this very direct, brash, and sometimes in-your-face approach, even if it's the right approach with Theros, what you do is you can have a contrasting element where you have Dominar coming in and offering a different approach, a very wise and gentle approach, and you get this nice contrasting element there where it really allows the layers of the character's depth and difference to really stand out. So this allows a lot of different situations that you can play off, things that you can explore, and this is where when you get into writing, you can really get into some exploratory writing, because you have these characters that are really diverse. They have these nice, strong, yet complementary differences, and when you're writing, you can just get into writing and just kind of see where the story takes you, see where the dialogue takes you, see where the conflict in these situations take you as you're thinking through, okay, well, here's our situation, this is how Theros would deal with it in this situation, but oh wow, we have Dominar in this situation, so Dominar would probably try to influence the situation to go this direction instead. It doesn't mean that it will go that way. But as a writer, what you have is you have this ability for the landscape of your narrative to be dynamic, and as you're writing it, you can kind of allow it to figure itself out in the way that it's going to flow. So it's a really fun thing to do. It's really good. And for my particular writing style, and I've touched on this a little bit before, I am more so an architect in terms of my writing style. You have gardeners who like to write by the seat of their pants. They call them pantsers. And then you have the architects who like to map everything out, know all the details, and then they follow an outline, and they're more rigid in their approach. Certain things have to happen in a certain order, and that's just the way it is, and we write until that happens. No person is going to fit either of those definitions perfectly. I am closer to the architect side. My writing, what I generally do, and I'll probably do a video where I get into this a little bit further and show you guys some visuals, but what I typically do is I give myself a rough outline once I have an idea of who the people are, who the characters are that I'm going to work with. I have a rough outline of different waypoints or map markers of how I'm going to get there. It's like a road trip. This is my best analogy that I can do. So if I'm driving here from North Carolina back to visit my family in Maine, what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to say, all right, well, I'm in North Carolina. We're probably going to make our stops in Maryland, and we're probably going to make another stop in Massachusetts, and then from there we're going to get to Maine. I'm not going to sit there and map out every single route that I'm going to take along the way, every single highway. But I am going to give myself some different waypoints that saying, well, I want to get from here to here, and I'm going to go through these via points or these waypoints. So when I'm doing an outline, I'm typically going to go from a real high level, say this is where I'm at, this is where I'm going to get, and these are all the possible destinations that I'm going to have to meet along the way. And so now there may be plenty of detours in that, and some of those may change as I go, but that's kind of my process. Well, the great thing is when you're writing with characters that are really strong characters that have depth and have a nice contrasting effect, what you can do is you can start out with that A to B destination, and you're going to find a lot of detours and side alleys and avenues and everything but shortcuts you're going to find with your characters as you're exploring your writing with them. And that's good, that's organic, that's natural, that's where depth comes in, that's where just really high quality writing comes in. That's what you want as a writer, and more importantly as a reader, that's what you want. You want to allow yourself that time to take those detours. When you're writing, you don't want to get bogged down in the minutia and the things that are irrelevant. You want to have brevity, but the scenic route is good too. You want to allow the readers to explore things, and sometimes, you know, in editing you might find out that there's a chapter or 3 chapters that you're going to cut because they really just don't fit. But my recommendation to all of you guys that are either current writers or aspiring writers is take those detours, take those scenic routes just right. Allow yourself and the characters the room to breathe, write it out, get into it, allow that scene to play itself out. You can always cut it out later in editing. You can always come back and do revisions. You can always come back and rewrite a scene completely, but let the characters breathe, let it play out. Go ahead and get into the writing. See where it takes you. See what growth happens. You're gonna, as you're writing, if you have the natural ability to be a writer, to be a creative writer, you're going to explore, you're going to learn things, you're going to discover things that you didn't know, whether it's about the character, the place, the backstory, the situation. Let that play out. Give your characters the freedom to do that. Give your characters the freedom to explore, and you're going to be rewarded for it. Don't lock yourself into something. Give yourself a roadmap. Tell yourself where it needs to start and where it needs to end, and maybe a few stops in the middle, but give yourself the freedom to explore, and you will be rewarded for it, and your characters will have so much more vibrance, so much more depth, and you'll know because they will really resonate with your readers. That's what happened with the two characters that I have, Theros Hammerfist, an orc who is so much different than a lot of your traditional orcs, which, by the way, people absolutely love. I can't tell you how many times people tell me, I love the fact that my favorite character was an orc. Totally unexpected, totally cool. The same thing with Dominar. A lot of people are like, I've always, liked dwarves, but they were never my favorites, and I love Dominar. He is so different. It's great, and people want more of it. So, but that doesn't always happen because you planned it that way, and that's cool. So, guys, give yourselves the freedom to write, to explore, to make mistakes, and your characters, if you do that, they will inject life into your writing. All right, that's enough for tonight, guys. Love you. Take care.